Okay, so when we do factoring, the first thing we're going to start with is GCF, your greatest common factor. And so what you're going to be doing is you're going to find that between your 2 or 3 terms, so it's got to be divisible by the same number for it to be a GCF, okay? And then when you look at your variables, you want to use the smallest exponent when you're looking at your variables. So if I had x to the 5th and x to the 3rd, I would be choosing x to the 3rd because, again, of what I just said, a GCF is whenever you divide everything by the same. So you want to divide and factor out the smallest exponent, okay? Because one of your rules is if you have, with variables, if you have a to the m over a to the n power, you subtract m minus n. So that's just a formula, okay? That's something you would have already learned in Algebra 1. So what I'm telling you is if I had x to the 5th divided by x to the 3rd, you're just subtracting. So that's why you want the smallest exponent to be your GCF, because you're going to subtract that off, and that would leave me with x squared. Okay, so that's just a side note of why you're choosing the smallest exponent. Okay, so once you choose your GCF, you're going to divide each term of that polynomial by the GCF, and you're going to write the GCF out front, and then whatever you get when you divide will be in parentheses. Okay. So if I have a 2x to the 4th minus 4x squared, if I have 2 and 4, my GCF would be what? What could I divide both of those by? 2. And then if I have x to the 4th and x squared, what's my smaller exponent? My x squared. So my full GCF would be 2x squared. So that's what I'm going to take each term and divide it by. And I bring that GCF out front, and I set up my parentheses. And then I divide. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. X to the 4th over x squared is going to give me x squared. 4 minus 2 will give me 2. That's that x squared. Then I have a negative 4 divided by 2, which is going to be negative 2. X squared over x squared cancels. So x squared minus 2 is going to stay in parentheses because that's what I'm left with once I divide my GCF out. And that would be my answer. Okay? So if I look at my next one, I've got 3 terms. I have 4x to the 5th minus 6x cubed plus 14x squared. So between 4, 6, and 14, I can divide all of those by what? 2. And then I have x to the 5th, x to the 3rd, and x squared. So my smallest exponent, again, is x squared. It just so happens that both GCFs are the same. It's not going to be like that every time. Okay, so I'm going to divide each one by 2x squared. So bring down your 2x squared. And then divide. 4 divided by 2 is 2. X to the 5th over x squared, 5 minus 2 is x cubed. Negative 6 divided by 2 is a negative 3. X cubed over x squared, 3 minus 2 is 1, so I'm just left with an x. And then I've got 14 divided by 2, which is 7. X squared over x squared goes away. So 2x squared times 2x cubed minus 3x plus 7 would be my final answer. And you can always check it. You can take this GCF and distribute it all the way through and make sure it gives you your final answer. Okay? You're good with that? Okay. So then we're going to do the difference of 2 squares. So for it to be the difference of 2 squares, you have to have a minus. That's where the difference comes from. You've got to have a minus. You have to have 2 terms. If it's more than 2 terms, it's not the difference of 2 squares. Okay, and then your numbers have to be perfect squares and your exponents have to be even. Okay, so you have to have perfect square numbers and even exponents. From this point forward, you always check for a GCF. If you have a coefficient in front of your x squared term, check for a GCF. Okay. If it meets everything, it's two terms with the minus, perfect squares, and even exponents, then you're going to use the formula that is, if you have a squared minus b squared, you factor it into a plus b times a minus b. So these are like your conjugates, okay? Same exact thing, just one's a plus, one's a minus. And the way we get that is just by taking the square root of each term, okay? Now, you can only do the difference of two squares. You cannot do the sum. If you have a plus sign in the middle, you need to check to see if you can take out a GCF. Then it might turn into difference of two squares, okay? So if I start with x squared minus 4, this is something that's like the most basic you'll see, okay? I have two terms. It's separated with a subtraction symbol. I've got a perfect square for 4, and 2 is an even exponent. So this is the difference of two squares. So if I can recognize it, I know I'm going to have two sets of parentheses. One is a plus, one is a minus. Okay, I'm going to take the square root of x squared, and all I'm doing is splitting that x squared into x and x. It's my first term in my original problem. It becomes the first term in both of those parentheses. Okay, then I take the square root of 4, and that is 2. So I put 2 as the second term. And there's my x plus 2 times x minus 2. It's very simple. You could check it by FOILing. X times x gives me x squared. Negative 2x plus 2x cancels, and this gives me a negative 4. So there's my x squared minus 4. Okay? Now 4x squared minus 9, I would check, do I have a GCF? Between 4 and 9, I do not. So then I check, are these perfect squares? They are. I've got my minus sign, I've got my even exponent, so I'm good. So they're going to separate into two parentheses. One's a plus, one's a minus. I take the square root of 4x squared. Square root of 4 is 2. X squared splits x and x. So I've got 2x as the first term in both sets of parentheses. And then the square root of 9 is 3. So I get 2x plus 3, 2x minus 3. They should be the exact same thing. One's a plus, one's a minus. Okay? So then, this next one, I have a negative 4x squared plus 16. I can't do the sum, but I can check for a GCF. Anytime you have a leading negative, you need to take out that negative as a GCF. Okay? So I know I can take that out, but between 4 and 16, what could I also take out? 4. So my GCF would be negative 4. I can't take out an x because it's not in both terms. The variable has to be in both terms for you to be able to take it out. Okay, so I'm going to divide each term by negative 4. So negative 4 divided by negative 4 is a 1, so it leaves me with x squared. 16 divided by negative 4 is negative 4. Okay, once I take that GCF out, I'm left with x squared minus 4. Now that's the difference of two squares. So I bring down this negative 4, and I factor my x squared minus 4 into two parentheses. One's a plus, one's a minus. Okay, my x squared splits x and x. Square root of 4 is 2. So negative 4 times x plus 2 times x minus 2 is my answer. Y'all good with that? We have questions so far? Now when we do trinomials, that's when you have three terms. Okay? Your x squared, if it does not have a number in front, it doesn't have a coefficient, all you're doing is taking factors of your last term to add or subtract to give you your middle. Okay? And I'm going to write over to the side the pattern that we're going to look at and how you know, depending on your last term, what your factors should look like as far as signs go. Okay? So if I have x squared plus bx plus c, okay, this c term, your very last term, is like your driver. It's going to tell you what the signs of your factors are going to be. Okay, so when this last term is positive, that means they're going to be the same sign. Okay, so that means my factors of that number will be the same sign. They're the sign of the middle. Okay, so if it's x squared, that splits x and x. They're the same sign, sign of the middle, so it's going to be x plus a number and x plus a number. Okay? If I have x squared minus bx plus c, that plus c is still a plus, so they're still going to be the same sign. I'm still going to have two sets of parentheses. I still split x and x. But now my middle term is negative. So they're the same sign, but they're both going to be negative. So it's going to be x minus a number, x minus a number. Okay? If I have x squared, it doesn't matter plus or minus bx. All that matters is if that last term is negative, they're going to be different signs. Regardless of what my middle term is, one's going to be a plus, one's going to be a minus. Okay? When they are different signs, your largest factor takes the sign of the middle term. So knowing if your factors are going to be the same or different signs is going to be key here. Okay? I'll give you all a second to finish writing. Alright, so what we're going to look at is this first example. I've got x squared minus 5x minus 6. So I'll look at the last term. It's a minus, so are those going to be the same or different signs? Different. Okay? If they're different signs, you are going to subtract your factors to give you your middle term. Okay? So I'm taking factors of a 6. My factors of 6 are 1 and 6, 2 and 3. Now they're different signs, so I have to subtract. Which set is going to subtract to give me this 5? 1 and 6. Okay? They're different signs. Your largest factor takes the sign of the middle. So my middle sign is negative. So my larger factor is 6. I should have a negative 6 and a positive 1. Okay? So what I do is I put that in my parentheses. I have x plus my 1 and x minus my 6. So if I FOIL it, x times x would give me x squared, x times negative 6 would be negative 6x, x times 1 is 1x, 1 times negative 6 is a negative 6. So then x squared minus 5x minus 6 matches, so this is my answer. Okay. So if I look at my next example, x squared minus 19x plus 48, my last sign is positive. So are they going to be the same or different? They're going to be the same. If they're the same, then I add my factors. Okay? So factors of 48 to give me 19. I've got 1 in 48. I've got 2 and 24. I have 3 and 16. I'm going to stop right there because 3 and 16 will give me 19. Okay? Now, they're the same sign. They're the sign of the middle. So it's going to both be negative. So x minus 3, x minus 16. You do not have to show me the full factor table. You only have to do what you need. If you automatically know your factors that are going to give you this, just write the 2 factors. I'm not going to count off if you don't give me a full list of factors. Okay? Do y'all know what I'm doing here? Okay. So we're going to take it a step further. Now we're going to have a coefficient in front of x squared. We're going to have a number. The moment you see a number in front of x squared, you still check for your GCF first. There won't always be a GCF, but sometimes there will be. Okay? If there's not a GCF, or even after you take out a GCF, what you're going to do is you're going to multiply your first number times your last number, that A times C. Okay? That number is going to be the new number that you take factors of. Okay? So if it were 2 and a 3, I'd multiply them to get 6. I would take factors of 6. Okay? Once I find my factors to give me the middle, say I have two numbers that work out, I multiplied at the beginning, I have to reverse that. Okay? So once you find your two factors, you're going to divide them both by A. You multiplied the first times last, now you're going to divide by the first term. Okay? Take it back out. You're going to simplify it if you can. Once you simplify it, the denominator is going to be your coefficient of x. Your numerator will be the constant. So whenever I write this, I always tack on my x at the bottom. That way I can know when I put it in my two sets of parentheses, my bottom comes first with my x, then plus or minus the number at the top. Okay? It makes sense with numbers. Alright, so if I have 4x squared plus 28x minus 72, I check for a GCF. 4, 28, and 72 can actually all be divided by 4. Okay, so if I take all of these and divide them by 4, 4 divided by 4 gives me what? Just 1, so it leaves me with x squared. 28 divided by 4 leaves me with 7x. And then 72 divided by 4 leaves me with what? 18. So when I take out my 4 as my GCF, I have x squared plus 7x minus 18. This is what I'm now factoring. This is my new middle problem, okay? I do not have a number in front of my x squared, so I don't have to do multiplying. I can just take factors of my 18 to give me 7. Now, are they going to be the same or different? It's a minus. They're going to be different. So I'm going to subtract my factors. Factors of 18, that will give me a 7, or what? 2 and 9. Now, they're different, so I need to know which one's positive, which one's negative. My largest factor takes the sign of the middle. So my 9 is positive, my 2 is negative. Okay? So I bring down my GCF. I split that trinomial into two parentheses. And I'm going to have x minus 2 and x plus 9. I could FOIL it again, then distribute my 4 to check it. I'm not going to for time's sake, but I would say definitely check that for your work. Okay? So this next one, 4x squared plus 8x minus 5, I don't have a GCF there. So this is when I'm going to take my first term and multiply it by my last. So 4 times negative 5 technically is a negative 20. Okay? You don't have to put the negative. The negative tells me what? They're going to be different signs. So I'm going to subtract my factors. So factors of 20 that subtract to give me 8 will be what? 2 and 10. Alright, I need to know which one's going to be positive, which one's going to be negative. 2 is negative and 10 is positive because your largest factor takes the sign of the middle. My middle term's positive. Okay? Once I do this step, I multiplied first times last, so I have to divide them by my first term. So I'm dividing both of these by 4. Alright? Negative 2 divided by 4 simplifies to negative 1/2. Bottom takes the x. Okay? 10 over 4 will simplify 5 over 2. Bottom takes the x. By putting your x on the bottom, now you can see it's going to be 2x and 2x. Okay? So when I split this into my two sets of parentheses, I bring that 2x first and then minus 1. And then I bring the next 2x first and then plus 5. So if I FOIL it, 2x times 2x does give me my 4x squared, which is what I want. And then I'm going to get plus 10x minus 2, which gives me my 8. And then negative 5, which gives me that. So this is my answer. Okay, so then we do another one. 2x squared plus 5x minus 3. I do not have a GCF, so I multiply first times last. 2 times 3 gives me 6. Are they going to be the same or different signs? Different signs. So what factors of 6 will subtract to give me 5? 1 and 6. 1 will be negative, 6 will be positive, because 6 is my largest factor. Then what do I need to do? Divide by my first term, which is 2. Negative 1 over 2 is already simplified, so the 2 takes the x. 6 divided by 2 simplifies to 3, but I need a denominator, so that's just a 1, and the bottom takes the x. So my final answer, I bring that 2x first, minus 1, and then x plus 3. All good with that? Okay, I want you to try your next one. So when I multiply 5 times 8, I get 40. Factors of 40 to give me 22. Are they going to be the same or different signs? Same, because, how do I know? Because it's a plus, so they're going to add. So factors that add to give me 22, 2 and 20. All right, once I pick my factors, then you should have what? Divide by 5. 2 over 5 doesn't simplify, so bottom takes the x. 20 over 5 simplifies to 4 over 1. Bottom takes the x. So you should have had what? Your final answer factored should be? You're good with that? Okay, so what we're going to do is put it all together, and now we're going to solve by factoring. Okay, that was just factoring expressions. Now we're going to have equations. They are completely two different things. Okay, the method is not different, but an expression versus an equation is very different. Okay, so if you have an equal sign, it has to be equal to 0. If it's not already equal to 0, you move things around to get it equal to 0. So you should have ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0. That's your goal. That's your first step. Then you're going to factor everything and make sure everything equals 0 for every step. If you drop off the equal 0, you no longer have an equation, you just drop it to an expression. So if you solve it, it makes no sense. Okay, so if you drop your equal to 0, you will get points taken off because of what you just mathematically did as far as dropping the equation part. Okay, so once you factor it and have it equal to 0, you're going to set each set of parentheses equal to 0 and solve. Okay, so if you remember intercept form in chapter 3 and you separated it and solved for your x-intercepts, that was factored form already. Okay, so if I have x squared plus 2x minus 8 equals 0, I do not have a coefficient in front of x squared. So I just find factors of 8 that will give me a 2. Are they going to be the same or different signs? Different, because that 8 is negative. So I'm going to subtract my factors. Factors of 8 that subtract to give me 2 would be what? 2 and 4. Which one's positive, which one's negative? Very good. I don't have to divide because I never multiplied at the beginning. So this just leaves me with x minus 2 and x plus 4 equals 0. Okay, then you just separate x minus 2 equals 0 and x plus 4 equals 0. Add my 2, x equals 2. Subtract your 4, x equals negative 4. So if you wanted to check it, you could store this 2 for x, type in the left side of your equation, make sure it gives you 0. Store the negative 4 for x, type it in, make sure it gives you 0. Okay? So this next one, x squared minus 10x equals negative 25, it's not equal to 0. I need to get it equal to 0, so I need to take this negative 25 and move it to the other side to complete my trinomial. So I'm going to add 25. So x squared minus 10x plus 25 equals 0. And then I factor. I need factors of 25 to give me a 10. What would that be? 5 and 5. They would be the same sign. They're the sign of the middle. So it should be x minus 5, x minus 5 equals 0. Notice they're the same thing. If they're the same thing, if you want to solve it once, that's fine, but you're going to have to tack on the notation that it's a double solution. If you don't think you'll remember that, solve it twice. Okay, so if you solve it once, you add your 5, x equals 5, and you just tack on a ds for double solution. But again, if you're not going to remember that, just solve it twice, because if you only solve it once and leave off your double solution, you're missing half your answer. Okay? Questions on that? Okay. Alright, now we have a coefficient in front of x squared. So 2x squared minus 11x plus 5 equals 0. Do I have a GCF between 2, 11, and 5? No. So I start by multiplying first times last, and that gives me 10. Are they going to be the same or different signs? They're going to be the same because it's plus, so I'm going to add my factors. So factors of 10, that give me 11. Negative 1 and negative 10, because they're both going to be negative. Can I just do x minus 1, x minus 10? No, because I would never get a 2x squared there. So I need to divide by 2. Negative 1/2 is already simplified. Bottom takes the x. Negative 10 divided by 2 gives me negative 5. Put it over 1. Bottom takes the x. So that leaves me with 2x minus 1 times x minus 5 equals 0. Separate 2x minus 1 equals 0. X minus 5 equals 0. Add my 1. 2x equals 1. Divide by 2. X equals 1/2. Add your 5. X equals 5. Good with that? If you get an x value, you can store it, plug it in, make sure it's equal to your right side of your original. Okay. I have 5n squared plus 2n equals 3. What do I need to do first? Move the 3 over because it's not equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract 3. That gives me 5n squared plus 2n minus 3 equals 0. I want you to do this one. What's my first step? So I get 15. Factors of 15 to give me 2. Negative 3, positive 5. And then what? Divide it by 5. Very good. Negative 3 over 5 doesn't simplify. Bottom takes the x. And then 5 over 5 simplifies to 1 over 1. Bottom takes the x. So you're left with, or n, x or n. So 5n minus 3, and then n plus 1 equals 0. So then 5n minus 3 equals 0, and n plus 1 equals 0. Add your 3. 5n equals 3. Divide by 5. N equals 3/5. Subtract your 1. N equals negative 1. There's my 2 answers. Okay? Y'all good with that? Do we have questions? We're going to skip the next one and move on to 4x squared plus 21x equals 18. Just because those are pretty much the same steps. So, this is 2, but we're still going to do it. Okay. 4x squared plus 21x equals 18. What do I need to do? Actually, if y'all are good, we can skip both of these. Y'all want to skip both of these? Y'all are okay? Alright. 12x squared plus 75 equals 60x. I need it equal to 0. I need to move it over, so I'm going to subtract 60x. Make sure you know where it belongs in your order. You should have 12x squared minus 60x plus 75 equals 0. If you put it in the wrong order, your whole problem will be wrong, because you're going to be taking factors of the wrong number. Okay? Now, once I do this, I need to check for a GCF. What's my GCF here? I start with my smallest number. Okay? Can 12 go into all of these? No, it cannot go into 75. So I take it down a factor. Can 6 can go into 12. 6 can go into 60. Can it go into 75? No. So then can 4? 4 can go into 60. Can it go into 75? No. So then 3. 3 can go into 12. 3 can go into 60. Can 3 go into 75? So then I'm going to divide all of them by 3. And since it's an equation, technically, you can just divide everything by 3, and you don't have to bring it out front. But if you want to, you can, and so you don't get confused, okay? But here, it just leaves us with 4x squared minus 20x plus 25 equals 0. An expression, you have to leave your GCF because it goes nowhere. But with an equation, you can divide it out, and you're left with this, okay? So now, I'm going to multiply 4 times 25. Gives me 100. Factors of 100, that give me 20. It will help you if you know, are they the same or different? Same. They're going to add. So factors that add to give you 20, 10 and 10. They're both going to be what sign? Negative. Divide them by 4. Simplifies to negative 5 halves. So factored form would be 2x minus 5 times 2x minus 5 equals 0. They're the same thing, so I'm going to solve it once. So 2x equals 5. Divide by 2, and x equals 5 halves. But what do I also need? My ds for double solution. Okay, my last example, 16x squared plus 8x plus 2 equals negative 4x. What do I need to do? Move it over, and I'm going to combine it with my 8x. So I add 4x to get it to the opposite side. So that leaves me with 16x squared plus now 12x plus 2 equals 0. Then what can I do? I need to take out a GCF. 16, 12, and 2, I can all divide by 2. So that leaves me with 8x squared plus 6x plus 1 equals 0. So then 8 times 1, I need to multiply. It gives me 8. They're the same sign, so they're going to add. Factors of 8, that give me 6, 2, and 4. Take both of those, divide by 8. 2 over 8 simplifies to 1 over 4. 4 over 8 simplifies to 1 over 2. So my factored form, 4x plus 1 times 2x plus 1 equals 0. Separate, 4x plus 1 equals 0, 2x plus 1 equals 0. Subtract your 1, 4x equals negative 1. Divide by 4, and x equals negative 1/4. Subtract your 1 again, 2x equals negative 1. Divide by 2, x equals negative 1/2. Okay? We good with factoring? It takes some practice if you're not good right now, but it's nothing new. Okay? Now we're going to move on to square roots. Solving using square roots. You're going to solve for your x squared just like you would an x. Okay? Once you get to x squared, the only thing that will undo square is a square root. Okay? Now, the rule with square roots is anytime you take the square root of a number when you're solving, it has a positive and negative solution. Because if I take the square root of 25, 5 times 5 will give me 25. But negative 5 times negative 5 will also give me 25. So your negative multiplication rules is why every time you take the square root, you have to have a plus or minus in front of that number. If you don't, you're missing half your problem. You're missing half the points. Okay? Every time you take a square root, you have to put the plus or minus. Okay? That's just split block. So if I look at my first example, I have x squared equals 36. My x squared is already by itself like it should be. So I'm just going to undo the square by taking the square root. So that leaves me with x equals, the moment you write the square root, the next step has a plus and minus. Okay, square root of 36 is what? 6. Now they're not all going to be that simple. If I have 3x squared plus 5 equals 41, what do I do? What do I want to solve for? My x squared. If it were just 3x plus 5 equals 41, what would you do first? Subtract your 5. That's what you do here. You're going to treat it the same way. So subtract my 5. 3x squared equals 36. Divide by 3. X squared equals 12. I undo the squared by taking the square root. X equals plus and minus. I automatically put it. Alright, now the square root of 12 is not a perfect square. If it's not a perfect square, what do you think I need to do with it? I need to do my little prime factor tree and simplify. Okay, that first lesson we did. So 12 splits into 2 and 6. 6 splits into 2 and 3. Remember, you circle your pairs. So I have a pair of 2s. I box what's left over. So the square root of 12 will simplify to what? 2 square root of 3. So x equals plus or minus 2 square root of 3. Okay? Two x squared equals 224. What do I do with that? Divide by 2. You cannot take the square root until x squared is completely by itself. So x squared equals 112. Take the square root of that. Leaves me with x equals plus or minus. Is the square root of 112 a perfect square? No. So I need to take 112. Split that into 2 and what? 56 splits into 2 and 28. 28 splits 2 and 14. 14 splits 2 and 7. So I have 2 pairs of 2 with a 7 left over. Remember, when you have multiples, you multiply them. So if I have 2 pairs of 2, what am I really taking out? 4 square root of 7. And even though that looks weird, I can still type 4 square root of 7, store it for x. I just get a decimal. It stores the decimal value. Type in your 2x squared, it will give you a 224. Okay? This next example, 5x squared minus 15 equals 125, I want you to do. My first step is what? Plus 15, so 5x squared equals 140. Divide by 5 and x squared equals 28. Should have taken the square root. X equals plus or minus 28 needs to be simplified. 2 and 14, 2 and 7. So you should have x equals plus or minus 2 square root of 7. We good with that? Okay. Now, these next few, I don't have x squared, I have a set of parentheses squared. So anything that's being squared is what you want to solve for. So this x minus 2 squared is what I want to get by itself. I do not ever change what's in parentheses. I do not distribute anything in front of it. Okay? Instead, what I'm going to do is divide by whatever is in front of it. So that leaves me with x minus 2 squared equals 8. Take the square root. It leaves me with x minus 2. So when you take the square root of that, whatever's in parentheses drops. Equals plus or minus 8 simplifies 2 and 4, 2 and 2. So that simplifies to 2 square root of 2. Okay, now that I have taken the square root, I need x by itself. So what I'm going to do is take this negative 2 and I'm going to bring it in front of the plus or minus. So I'm going to add my 2. X equals 2 plus and minus 2 square root of 2. So when you have a set of parentheses squared, that's what you want to isolate. You'll take the square root and simplify. Then your last step is to move that constant over, and it should look like this. Unless it's a perfect square. Okay, so here, on this next one, 1/4 x plus 3 squared minus 2 equals 2. I want the x plus 3 squared by itself. So I'm going to add 2. I always add or subtract before I multiply or divide. So 1/4 times x plus 3 squared equals 4. Now I need to get rid of that fraction. Do I divide by fractions? No. If you do, you're getting points taken off. Okay? Instead of dividing by a fraction, I multiply by the reciprocal, which is just 4/1, which is 4. So that leaves me with x plus 3 squared equals 16. Now I can take the square root. X plus 3 equals plus and minus what? 4. I still need x by itself. I can still move my 3 over by subtracting 3. X equals negative 3 plus or minus 4. But I'm not going to leave it like that. If it's a perfect square, you actually separate and get your two x values. There's no reason to leave it like this. So what I mean by separate is I'm separating this plus and minus. So I'm going to have x equals negative 3 plus 4 and x equals negative 3 minus 4. So x equals 1 and x equals negative 7. So when you have a perfect square, at some point you should be splitting it to get your two answers. But if it has a radical, you leave it as is. Okay? Alright, so I want you to do the next one. Okay, your first step should be to do what? Add your 12. So 6 times x minus 4 squared equals 72. Then you should have divided by 6. X minus 4 squared equals 12. square root it. X minus 4 equals plus or minus, what'd you end up getting? Very good. Move your 4 over by adding. X equals. Very good. Alright. This next one. I add my 7. 3 times x plus 1 squared equals 16. Divide by 3. X plus 1 squared equals 16 divided by 3 is 16 over 3 is a fraction. Alright. When you take the square root of this, it leaves you with x plus 1 equals plus and minus. You're doing the square root of 16 over the square root of 3. Okay? Now, square root of 16 is what? 4. Square root of 3 I can't do anything with. What do I need to do then? I need to rationalize because I cannot have a radical in the denominator. So I'm going to multiply by itself. This is back to my first lesson we did. Okay? So that x plus 1 equals plus or minus 4 square root of 3 over 3. Okay, so if you end up with a fraction, you're going to have to rationalize. Then I can subtract my 1. X equals negative 1 plus or minus 4 square root of 3 over 3. Okay. Now, what if I take the square root of a negative? What do I get when I take the square root of a negative? An I. So, x equals, I still have plus or minus, but the square root of negative 25 is the same as square root of negative 1 times square root of 25. So, square root of 25 is a perfect square. Square root of negative 1 is what? My I. So it's plus or minus 5i. When it's a perfect square, remember that I goes behind that number. It goes in front of a radical, but behind the number that would be a perfect square. Okay, so this next example, I would add 11. 2x squared equals negative 36. Divide by 2. X squared equals negative 18. Take the square root. X equals, I know I'm going to have a plus and minus. This is the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 18. 18 I know can simplify. 2 and 9, 3 and 3. I know the square root of negative 1 is an I. So I'm going to pull out the 3, followed by the I, square root of 2. Okay. This next example, 4 times x minus 5 squared plus 1 equals negative 71. I'm going to subtract my 1. 4 times x minus 5 squared equals negative 72. What's my next step? Divide by 4. X minus 5 squared equals negative 18. take the square root. X minus 5 equals plus and minus. I just did the square root at negative 18. It gives me 3i square root of 2. I just copied it from this. Okay. All I need to do now is add my 5, and my final answer is x equals 5 plus or minus 3i square root of 2. Okay, we're good with that? Alright. Finding zeros of the function. A zero of the function is the same as an x-intercept. Okay? So that means you're solving for x. So what you do is you just take your function, set it equal to 0. So 4x squared plus 20 equals 0. Solve for x. Subtract your 20. 4x squared equals negative 20. Divide by 4. X squared equals negative 5. Take the square root. X equals plus and minus. What's that going to simplify to? I got the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 5. We know square root of negative 1 is I. Square root of 5 can't simplify. So it's x equals plus or minus I square root of 5. The I goes before the radical always. Okay? Now, there were a lot of examples on today's notes. There's a lot to cover. You've got a quiz over this, so make sure you are practicing. Okay? That next quiz is the last quiz that goes for the 6 weeks. Then you've got the Chapter 4 test, and then 6 weeks to review, 6 weeks test. Okay?